So I will go to the next session, which is what is Linux? Most of the commands that we are going to go through in the course, they are agnostic. They will work on any Linux or Unix-like system. And that means they also may work on Mac, because Mac OS is also a Unix-like OS, and most of the commands will be the same. Linux is a family of open source Unix-like operating systems. It's based on the Linux kernel, and that's a kernel that was first released back in 1991 by Linus Torvalds. Operating system, what is that? It's a software that sits underneath all the other software on a computer, and it manages the computer's hardware, things like CPUs, GPUs, memory and storage, and things like this. And it also takes care of the connections between other hardware and other software. So, and also the programs to handle the input with the user. Linux is typically packaged as a Linux distro that includes the kernel and the supporting system software and libraries. This supporting system software and libraries are things like user interfaces, drivers for that, and many other things. Much of that is provided by the GNU project. And that is something you may see often when you Google something about Linux. Much comes from the GNU project, which are an open source project. Many Linux distros, you may have heard this name, distro or distribution, that includes Ubuntu and Debian, which are some of the more common, mostly easy ones. Ubuntu is very user-friendly. There's Fedora and Gentoo, which a friend of mine really likes, and many, many others. So, many of them are free and open source. There are also commercial distributions, Red Hat Enterprise and SUSE, for instance. So they are also used commercially. They have desktop environments. That's things like GNOME, you may have heard of, Mate, KDE, Plasma, XFCE, Unity. There are many others. I'm currently running XFCE. If you're using the thin link connection to some of the Swedish supercomputer centers, then you will see that some have XFCE, some have Mate, I believe, and some have GNOME. I think those are the more popular ones. And this window manager, together with applications and a widget toolkit, that is usually handling most of what the user sees. But the Linux OS is below that. So below it's not the desktop environment, it's running on Linux. There are also windowing system, but I'm not going to talk about that. So the shell. The shell is what you see. The shell is also the terminal. It's a special user program. It's an interface with between the keyboard and the operating system. The operating system, again, is often shortened OS, which you have almost certainly seen. It takes commands from the user input, and that comes from, for instance, the keyboard or the mouse, and it sends it to the OS. And then that performs the actions requested or tells the hardware to do things. This shell we are looking at here is the Linux or Unix shell. It's a command line interpreter. It gives you a so-called command line interface. And that is similar for many Unix-like systems. And we'll talk more of it. There are many shells that have different properties. For this case, we are going to use what is called the Bourne shell, or rather the Bourne again shell. It's a newer version of it. Bash. That is what runs at most centers, if not all centers, because it's compatible with the batch system that's used to send jobs to these clusters. Also because it's good for scripting, for instance. So most centers has bash as default. And yeah, I already mentioned this. So we are using bash, so that is what we're going to talk about. Most things are the same, but there are some commands that differs between the different shells, but those parts we are not really going to look at except for setting environment variables and scripting. The other parts will be the same. So why would you use the shell? Well, it has been there for a long time. It probably wouldn't have if it was really bad. It's quite a powerful tool. It lets users perform complex, powerful tasks. Tasks can be done with a few keystrokes usually, or a few lines of code. And a very important thing is you can automate repetitive tasks or combine them to scripts, which means you can work faster and more effectively. Another thing, most centers here in Sweden and elsewhere, indeed, all over the planet, use some flavor of Linux. It's stable, reliable, and customizable, and it can run on any hardware. And there's a strong community, which means usually something will be fixed fairly quickly. Many flavors that are open source and free, and there are many applications, and in general, it's lightweight. On desktops, not very many use it, but web servers, almost all. And then also you have Android, which is based on the Linux kernel. All the supercomputers on top 500 run Linux. So there is a lot of good reasons to be proficient in Linux. And hopefully this course will help you. There is some guides here and cheat sheets, which we'll look at more later. And when we get the intermediate Linux course opened up for registration, then you can go and sign up for that as well if you want to. Hopefully it will be running in early June. So let's go to the command line interface and the shell, and I'm just going to check how the time is before I do anything else. So we are very closely on time. Good. So the command line interface and the shell. What is it? And what is a shell? And why do we want to use it instead of something like, for instance, the GUI? So this here you see, that is shown here, or that you have now on your computer logged into, is a shell or a terminal window. And this example here is where I have logged in at that instance when I took this picture here a couple of weeks ago. It was from my desktop that's called Defiant. I now have a different desktop which is called Enterprise because I like Star Trek. But this doesn't matter. This shows how it looks when you log into Kebnekaise. And you saw a moment ago how it looked also when I log into Tetris. And it is for typing commands directly to the computer operating system. It's a user interface. You navigate it only with the keyboard, and that is the different to the graphical user interface. You type commands at a prompt. The prompt is the one you see here. It's usually on bash marked with a $sign. And you can see it's standing here, and in this case, blinking to show it's active. It's waiting for your input. And it's available on all operating system, a command line interface. Windows also has it. It's not very much used there, but it has it. And well, Linux and macOS has it, of course. It's most commonly associated with Linux. But you cannot use the mouse to control the command line interface like you would with the graphical user interface. And as mentioned here, it could be shown as a $sign, as a percentage, or as this larger than psi, depending on the shell. And the prompt means it waits for input. So the opposite of a command line interface, or CLI as it's shortened, is a GUI, the graphical user interface, and you often navigate it with a mouse or similar. And usually you can do more things on the command line interface than you can in the GUI. And usually it's also faster, more efficient. So, for instance, you will often be in the situation where you log into a remote system if you're working at one of the supercomputer centers. And then a command line interface can be a lot faster if you're just sitting with a small terminal. And also uses less bandwidth, of course. So a shell is a special user program. It's the interface between the keyboard and the operating system. It takes command input from the user, from the keyboard, sends it to the OS. And yeah, we already mentioned these things. And you will, depending on what system you are at, see a slightly different looking prompt. But most likely you will see a $sign because it will most likely be bash. In these examples that are here in this material, sometimes I think the prompt is shown. If that is shown, do not copy it. You just copy the command itself. When you copy code snippets. So a line like this is fine, you just copy all of it. But I think there were some instances where I didn't get the $sign removed because I was going to keep that in front of it first, but only copy the actual command. You will often hear words as shell, terminal, console, command line interface. Are there differences or are they the same? What is it? Well, the terminal is a text input-output environment. The console was originally a physical terminal, but that is also now used interchangeable. And the shell is the command line interpreter, the program itself. But they are used interchangeably. If you want to read more about it, there is some things I wrote here, so you can take a look at that. Okay, and if you want to, you could now open a terminal and just test it out. I'm guessing you already did open a terminal and you already tested it out because you actually got these exercises. You could try type ls. I will talk about it in a moment, and we should maybe wait for that. But otherwise, just try and do that just to see that now you've got these subdirectories created after unpacking the table. And it's also good to know that there are error messages, of course, if you type something that's not quite what it is, because when you are using the keyboard and you're typing there, you very easily will mistype, at least I do. And then the operating system will give you a hint that you did something wrong. So it will tell you if it doesn't know your command, for instance. So it just says command not found. If it doesn't know one, or if you try to open a file that doesn't exist, or if you don't have permission to it, then it will tell you it cannot access it or that it doesn't exist. But we will probably see that when we are doing the exercises. So key points: shell, it's a special user program, interface between keyboard and operating system. It takes input from the user, it sends it to the OS, and then gets the actions requested performed. We'll use bash. You can run the programs from the shell by entering the commands at the command line prompt. There are many advantages to the shell. There is the ability to automate repetitive tasks, combine smaller tasks in the script, as well as the speed of executing commands, compared to a GUI, which are often more resource heavy. It's also much easier to use remotely if you just have a small shell that you have logged into. Of course, one difficulty is how do you find out which commands exist and how to run them? But I guess it can also be difficult to find the commands in the GUI. But one thing you can do is that you can start typing the beginnings of what you think it might be called, and then hit the tabulator or tab key, and it will autocomplete with a suggestion. Otherwise, the best thing is to maybe go online and Google it and see how do I do this. And often someone will have said, you can do it this way, simply because Linux has a very large community. So there will often be answers online.